Welcome to the series on a guide through the classroom assessment process. This is Module 6, Assuring Assessment Validity. I'm Daniel Frederking, Instructional Support Specialist with the Illinois Center for School Improvement. Illinois CSI's mission is high-performing districts, high-achieving students. Assessment is a crucial part of the learning process and thus directly supports this mission. Our session outcomes today are: understand the importance of validity when creating student assessments, and understand strategies that can be applied to assure assessment validity. This module includes several different resources, including this slide presentation, a validity handout known as Assuring Assessment Validity, a sample selected response assessment item index, or Appendix A as it's labeled, and a sample calculation of item discrimination index, the D value, or Appendix B as that one's labeled. So, what is validity? Validity is the degree to which a measurement accurately describes the real world. As classical test theory tells us, the observed score is equal to the true score plus the measurement error. The observed score is, according to the test, how the students are doing. The true score is how the students are actually doing. You want that observed score and that true score to be as close to equal as humanly possible. But the thing that gets in the way is the measurement error. This is the factors that make the observed score and the true score different. So, the goal of this slide presentation and the entire process of ensuring validity is to reduce the measurement error. We need to rid assessments of any non-academic factors that could alter the student's score. We want the observed score and the true score to be close as possible. So I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process to ensure that there is assessment validity. And step one of this process is to create the assessment. Now, this obviously is only something you would need to do if this is a brand new assessment, if it's never been created before. The assessment should not be an afterthought of the instruction, but instead a primary aspect of the curriculum. It's what measures student learning. Depending on the results, it should alter instruction to ensure that the maximum amount of learning occurs. By law, our focus should be on the standards. So the assessment should focus on the student's mastery of those standards. So the standards and the smaller components within them should be what are assessed. So deciding what should be assessed should come naturally. First, determine the curricular aims of the lesson, the unit, the semester, whatever. What were the goals of the curriculum? What skills should a student possess as a result? This is exactly what you should be assessing. So specifically, we're going to be talking about certain Type 2 and Type 3 assessments. You might know these terms. They're often used in things like the teacher evaluation system. Type 2 assessments are used on a district-wide basis where all teachers in the district in a specific grade or specific subject area use the same test. Type 3 assessments are used in the classroom, and they're rigorous and aligned to the course's curriculum. Both of these could be created within district, and so this is what we're talking about in this module, is creating these assessments. So when creating an assessment, it might be a good idea to create an assessment blueprint that ensures that the assessment clearly addresses the expectations of the standards. A blueprint helps teachers visualize the balance of the assessment and the standards addressed by the assessment. An assessment blueprint may take many forms, but here's an example of a selected response or constructed response assessment. You see on the left-hand side there is the standard, and on the right-hand side is the items that actually address that standard. When I use the term item, I mean the specific items on an assessment. So you could, in many situations, replace that with the word question. So for standard RL 6.1, the items or questions that are addressed are question number 2, number 5, and number 6. Step 2 is the review process. Now, some of these things might take a while to do, so I don't necessarily recommend this for every single assessment you give, but for big ones that really have an impact on the student's grade, things like final exams, maybe only give them once a semester or once a year, then I would recommend these things. We're going to talk about standards alignment review, content review, and bias review. This review report will go through each item on the test and really dig deep into it to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. You can see the left-hand column is the item column here. Questions number 1, number 2, number 3. The next column is standard alignment. Because this is such a crucial part of the assessment process, as well as the education process as a whole, check the accuracy of the claim that the item aligns to a specific standard. Just double check this, make sure that you are assessing what you think you're assessing. For these three on this example, I wrote OK because everything seemed to be OK on this front. The content review is when you review every aspect of the test for issues with the content. This is where you would pay close attention to grammar, spelling, sentence construction, things like that. A poorly written item could ruin a good assessment. It is important to ensure that items are completely clear of this so that there is nothing that will get in the way of students providing their best answer. An item should never be intended to trick a student into giving an incorrect answer. So for this one, items 2 and 3 look fine, but item 1 had an issue. It appears to use a double negative, which will confuse the students on the correct answer. That's something that I want to correct before I move forward with this assessment. The third column there is the bias review. Certain items may have content that may offend or unfairly penalize a group of students because of some defining characteristic, whether it be gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, whatever. You'll want to revise these items to remove the bias and allow all students an equal chance to succeed. Items 1 and 2 looked fine, but item 3 referenced golf rules. This might be discriminating against those who do not play golf. This isn't a golf test, so students shouldn't be graded on whether or not they know the rules of golf. If that's going to get in the way of them performing the best in this assessment, then that probably should be revised. Step 3 is the data collection. This is what you do after the assessment has been given at least one time. So you've got a baseline here. So what you would do is you would look at, and this is a complete class I'm looking at. In this specific class, I have 30 students that took the test. You can see in the left-hand column, total number of tests is 30. In the second column is total number of items per test. Well, this test that I'm looking at had 50 questions on it, so 50 is the answer there. The third column is the highest individual score. The highest score of all the 30 students in this class, the highest score that anyone achieved was a 49 out of 50. The next column is the lowest individual score. The lowest score of this whole class that anyone received was a 32 out of 50. And then the average score at the end. The average score here, after looking at them all, adding all of them together divided by 30, is a 41. This is just a snapshot here. You can pull different things from this. There's only a limited amount of data that you can pull here. You're going to have to dig in a little bit deeper to get more specifics, but at least you can pull something. So, for example, I see that no student in the class got a 50 out of 50. That might not be a bad thing. That might be legitimate, but it's just something that I now know. The lowest individual score is a 32 out of 50. That could be much worse. We know that no students in this class got a 10 out of 50. That's good news. So it just gives you a little bit of a snapshot which you can then use to make decisions later. Now, it's important to not only collect results on the assessment as a whole, but also on every individual item. This allows for an analysis of each component of the test. Once again, this may be done in many ways depending on the assessment, but here's an example. This is an item-specific data report. You can see the number of item on the left-hand side, the number of students who responded correctly to each item, and the total number of students who responded to an item. Now, this may start to seem like a lot of work here, but for something as big as, say, a final exam, or something that means a lot to the student's grade, then this probably is something that's necessary. It's also important to collect student-specific data. So keeping each student's individual test is important for analysis of a student's performance on a specific item in relation to a student's performance on the entire test. Step 4 is the data analysis step. This is where we really get to dig into all that data that's been collected and see what we can learn from it. So first of all is general performance. It's always important to consider your first impressions when viewing the test results. You've spent a lot of time with these students, so you may already have a good idea of what the results are going to be. So ask yourself, did the students perform as you expected? Does something about these results seem off? These are good things to just reflect on in a general sense at the beginning. Beyond that, we can dig into the data a little bit more through difficulty indices, item discrimination indices, and distractor analyses, which are all done by fairly simple statistical formulas. So first of all, difficulty indices, or as I and many statisticians call it, the p-value. You can calculate the p-value for each individual item on a test. So go back to your item-specific data where you looked at every individual item, the number of students responded correctly, and the total number of students that responded to the item. You calculate the p-value by taking that number of students that responded correctly and dividing it by the total number of students responding to an item. So, for example, if item 1 was answered correctly by 23 out of 30 students, then the p-value would be 0.77 because 23 divided by 30 is 0.77. The p-value can range anywhere from 0 to 1.0. The higher the p-value, the easier the question is. Next up is the Item-Discrimination Indices, or the D value as many people call it. What this does is this shows how frequently those who score highly on the test as a whole answer an individual item correctly. So, a little bit more this time. To find the D value, first of all, what you would do is you would order all the papers you've got. So if you've got a class of 30, order all of these papers from the high score down to the low score, and I'm talking about the total score. So if we remember from the chart that we looked at earlier, the highest score in the class was the 49 out of 50, and the lowest score was the 32 out of 50. The high score would be on the top of the pile, the low score would be on the bottom. What you then want to do is divide the papers into a high group and a low group with an equal number of papers in each group. So basically 15 in each group. If it's an odd number, what you can easily do is just remove the middle one and split it up evenly down the middle at that point. Step 3 is to calculate the p-value, which was just discussed on the last slide. Calculate the p-value for each of the high and the low groups. And then step 4 is subtract the p-value from the low group from the p-value of the high group to obtain each item's discrimination index, and that's the D value that is listed above. So you calculate this number, this D value, but then what does that mean? What do you do with it? Well, you follow this chart. This is the guidelines for evaluating the discriminating efficiency of items. So if you get a number that's 0.40 or above, then that's really known as a very good item. Basically what that's saying is that students who are overall doing very well on this test are also overall doing very well on this item, while students who are doing poorly on the test are doing very poorly on this item. This item really reflects exactly what the test as a whole reflects, and that's what you want items to do. You can see the numbers decrease and it gets down to 0.19 and below are poor items. This basically means that for whatever reason, the item is not necessarily reflecting the test as a whole. What you will see sometimes is you will see a negative number, which is obviously 0.19 or below, but that basically means that students who are doing poorly on the test as a whole are for some reason doing better on this specific item than the students who are doing well on the test as a whole. And that's not good. That's strange that that would happen, but it does happen occasionally, and it is something that you want to address. So I'm now going to add to the item-specific data table that I had on slide 14. You can see the first 3 columns here are 3 columns that you've seen before, but I'm adding the next 2 columns as well, the p-value and the d-value. This is going to give me even more information on every one of these items. You can see that on this chart, the d-value for item number 2 is a negative number, which is something that I certainly want to address. Now, in some situations, if you really want to dig into a specific item more, you can do what's called a distractor analysis. Now, this only works for multiple choice tests because what a distractor is it's the other options that might distract the student from choosing the correct answer. So, you can see this chart here. This is about one specific item, item number 23. I've got the data right there, the p-value and the d-value. You can see that d-value is a negative number. So that's really what I want to dig into. That's really what I want to figure out what's going on here. So what I've done is I've split the class into the upper 15 students and the lower 15 students for this specific test. So looking at the students who performed the best overall on this test and performed the lowest overall on this test. And basically I'm doing that because I just want to get an idea of how the upper group is doing as compared to the lower group. So I've got here, you can see I've signified which is the correct answer, very important for me to know, it's B. The first thing that jumps out to me is that for whatever reason, the lower 15 students seem to be getting answer B correct more often than the upper 15 students, which is strange, and that's not what you want. You don't necessarily want the test item to reflect the opposite of what the test is reflecting itself. So to look at it a little bit more, I can see that for whatever reason, the upper 15 students seem to be distracted most by answer C. Doesn't seem to be an issue with the lower 15 students. So that's something that is concerning. So what I'm definitely going to do is I'm going to go back to this item number 23, and I'm going to try to get an idea of what's going on. Read it over again, read answer B, read answer C, and try to figure out why are the upper students not answering B as much as they are answering C, which is the incorrect answer. That is something that I think I need to address right away because there seems to be an issue with this item. So step 5 is the adjustment phase. At this point, make changes based on what you've learned. As changes are made to items or you replace them completely, it's always a good idea to revisit the review process to ensure that the new item that you brought in is of good quality. What you'll then do is continually repeat steps 2 through 5 as you continue to administer this assessment. So next steps, think about it. How will you go back and use this in your classroom? What additional support will you need to get this implemented into your classroom practices? One great resource that I use while completing this slideshow is Popham's Classroom Assessment, What Teachers Need to Know. This will really walk you through the assessment creation process, and I highly recommend it to all of you. So once again, I'm Daniel Frederking, an Instructional Support Specialist with the Center for School Improvement, and feel free to contact us at any time with anything you might need. We are happy to help. Visit us at our website, illinoiscsi.org.